Welcome to Kitchen Table Conversations, a series of short and shareable conversation starters for those of us who have or love and support people with a complicated and beautiful brain. Here's your host, Angela Geddes.
Hi, everyone, and welcome to another edition of Kitchen Table Conversations. I'm your host, Angela, and once again, just thanks so much for deciding to spend a little bit of your time here with me today. So I just wanted to focus today's conversation around what I've been up to lately, and that continues to circle around offering training sessions and with the aim to build system capacity, to build skills amongst clinicians and caregivers, so that they can feel a little bit more competent in addressing and being able to identify and screen and assess for some of the puzzling symptoms that come with complicated mental health and complicated learning and sometimes complex neurodevelopmental conditions. So mental health support will be different when individuals have neurological or neurodevelopmental conditions such as ADHD, such as autism spectrum disorder, such as cerebral palsy, such as fetal alcohol spectrum disorder, or just the symptoms that are often associated with prenatal alcohol exposure, even if we don't have a diagnosis or we don't completely meet criteria. We do know that alcohol, and we're certainly learning more and more about marijuana and other substances and the impact on the developing fetus, and we're learning that even the developing zygote and egg and sperm can be impacted by alcohol exposure. So we're learning a lot more. We're learning that fathers have a very significant role to play in terms of prevention of any kinds of neurological or neurodevelopmental conditions. And we also know that there's an increased risk of mental health symptoms and conditions that result from even pretty small amounts of alcohol use during pregnancy and before and at the time of conception. And again, both moms and dads are a part of this equation and have a role to play to support really healthy pregnancies. So I want to share that there's some good news and there's some bad news. I have been very actively involved in offering training sessions for whole communities, full day training sessions, where we do discuss things like, the urgent need for all of us to be concerned. So we talk about statistics, we talk about some surprising and startling statistics around the prevalence rates, and then actually who actually has a diagnosis or who's able to access assessment services. And then we talk about what does the effects of prenatal alcohol or prenatal substance exposure, what does that look like across the lifespan? So when we're doing our screens, our developmental screens on little people, and right across the lifespan, then maybe we could become a little bit more aware of some of these puzzling symptoms that in and of themselves, maybe one isn't that significant. For example, if your little person is a little bit slow to toilet train, not earth-shattering, but when you couple that with sleep problems and feeding problems and intense moods and maybe a little bit of affect dysregulation or some sensory stuff or just some easily frustrated, those kinds of things. When you put all of those things together, then sometimes it completes a bigger picture that we have to understand a little bit more clearly. So I'm really impressed with people's interest in this and how many times people walk away from these presentations going, wow, I didn't realize that, and I've learned so much from today's session, and it's just so heartwarming to see the interest and the inspiration. And I was saying this week while I was in Brantford that these sessions are actually quite therapeutic for me, because as a therapist who does work with we do support people with all kinds of mental health and wellness issues, but we also kind of specialize in complex neurodevelopmental disorders, and that's fairly rare. And so sometimes, even as a therapist, it feels a bit isolating. And there does seem to be some resistance to some of the strategies that we're suggesting, because this is not a short-term fix kind of thing. This is not come on in and have 6 sessions and you're going to feel better at the end of the day. Now, we hope that people feel better after 1 session, but neurodevelopmental conditions are lifelong. Mental health conditions can be managed in a good way, and sometimes short-term interventions are helpful. It's rare that a neurodevelopmental condition sees monumental changes and leave people without the need for some sort of lifelong kind of support and scaffolding. So again, I find these day-long trainings really therapeutic, and I continue to get energized and inspired. So once we're done talking about what this kind of looks like across the lifespan, we talk a lot about strategies. And I've just recently authored another little book. It's not a huge book, but it's a book that is it's called Not Your Typical Parenting Approach, because parenting individuals who have neurodevelopmental disabilities or disorders is quite a paradigm shift from some of the typical parenting strategies that we've learned along the way. So when memory is affected and we're trying to parent, if we didn't know that memory was a real problem, we would be assuming that people are disinterested, not following through, maybe just non-compliant. Whereas when memory is really an issue, we need to put together strategies and environmental supports that will make memory or the day-to-day activities easier in spite of the memory deficits. So it's called Not Your Typical Parenting Approach, and we do talk about some of the symptoms that are commonly found with complicated presentations. So we do go into detail, like what does memory really look like in terms of inconsistent performance and some of those unique nuances that are quite puzzling, because lots of times long-term memory could be like fabulous, but yet short-term memory and day-to-day activities need to be repeated to be followed through. So we also talk about decision making and judgment issues that are commonly found with some of these complex neurodevelopmental conditions. We talk about abstract concepts and what it looks like, and then we certainly go through possible strategies that would be different but yet helpful. Language and communication, and how sometimes there's often a huge discrepancy between expressive language, so very, very, very good communicators, but sometimes recall and retention and also just understanding, bringing in that information, receptive language, they call it, can sometimes be quite different. So in other words, we often assume because people are quite skilled and have a really good vocabulary that their language and communication is really good. But when they don't follow through with things, or when they're confused about things, again, people might not understand that actually the reception of the language and the communication is not as good as the expression. So planning and organizing and executive functioning is often an area where people really struggle. So we talk about what that looks like and how that can be problematic, but then also some strategies, which we also go through. Oftentimes people have a difficult time with processing information in the same time frame as their peer group or other people, so they need a little bit more time and space. So we talk about that and how we can be helpful. And oftentimes transferring of learning or generalizing is not always there. So sometimes we assume that if you know how to do something in this environment, you will probably know how to do it in this environment. But slight changes of context can be quite significant and make things overwhelming or difficult. And then there's oftentimes the people that I support overthink, but to an extreme. So they can ruminate or perseverate. And this perseveration can really become problematic, because sometimes it almost seems like it's forcing them to do things that they probably maybe shouldn't do, or maybe put them at risk. And we also talk about dysmaturity and individuals who are kind of late bloomers, and that's different than immaturity. So what does that look like, and how can we be helpful to make sure that we protect people from their vulnerabilities, all the while being really cognizant of, safety, emotional and physical safety, of course, for the individual and the people around them, but also dignity. How do we navigate some of these extra supports that we need to put into place, and extra supervision, for example, to somebody who is 16 years old and is really interested in doing things a little bit more independently. So we talk about things like that, and impulsivity and making mistakes and having trouble with attention and concentration and keeping focus. So what does that really look like for the 25-year-old who's trying to keep a job, and what can we do in order to support and allow people to really shine and really, focus on their strengths and their values and their character, and really recognize that these areas that I'm talking about are symptoms of a neurodevelopmental condition and not just behaviors. So sensory processing disorders and deficits are symptoms. So people do not try to be a pain in your butt when they say that I can't wear jeans because they're too picky, or I can't wear a sweater because it bothers my neck. You need to fix these shoes because they're too tight or too rough, or whatever it is. Some of those things are really, really real. And then also, I work with a number of individuals who don't feel temperatures or pain to the same degree as other people. So I've had individuals walk home from the playground with a broken ankle and not know it. I've seen people be outside in the cold without a jacket and not feel it until they come in and are recovering from frostbite, where the pain is so intense then there is some recognition that something's gone wrong. And then also a number of the people that I support don't feel the urge to go to the washroom in the same way until it's maybe an urgent situation. So there's accidents for a longer period of time developmentally. And also I work with a lot of individuals who don't feel hunger to the same extent, and they certainly cannot feel that fullness. So sometimes we overeat or undereat and need to be reminded, but yet sometimes people can just gorge and eat to the point where they're not feeling very well, and eat some of the wrong foods and eat too quickly, which can be all, kind of challenging. So that's what this book is about, and that's what we talk about in a full day training. And again, just really honored that people seem to appreciate what it is that we're talking about and what we're being helpful with. And then we also talk about acceptance commitment therapy and the role of us as therapists with individuals who have these complex or complicated mental health and learning challenges, and how beneficial it can be to use acceptance commitment therapy, because again, it is very centered around the individual's values and what can get in the way of people behaving in line with their values, which naturally leaves us all feeling very distressed. So we want to prevent some of those secondary conditions where we're feeling pretty beat up and badly about the ongoing mistakes we make due to the symptoms of impulsivity, for example. So that's what I've been doing. I was up in North Bay for a full day. I was in Port Huron for a full day. I was just in Brantford for a full day, and now I'm going to be going to Fanshawe College for 3 more sessions there in various campuses to speak about my book, which is called A Complicated and Beautiful Brain. And again, this not your typical parenting approach is a nice addition to that. But again, there's the good news is people are interested. There's some bad news in that, when I'm sharing some of the statistics, I had a question just this last week saying, I'm really a little distressed listening to what you had to say around prevalence rates and around people's patterns around drinking during pregnancy and how they're on the rise. And she said, how can that be, when she said she had children 30 years ago and knew then that alcohol was not safe during pregnancy. So how is it that we're not getting the message? And, I don't really have the answer for that, but I've been saying for many, many years that our prevention efforts are falling short, not because of lack of effort, lack of trying, lack of commitment, lack of financial support. Well, maybe there's a little bit. there is a lack of kind of policy around this and making sure that this information is out there more prevalently. I had a father one time say to me, like, why are there not commercials during the Super Bowl around this issue? Why is it that I have to be 55 years old before I realize that, small amounts of alcohol, even before the pregnancy is confirmed, is dangerous? Why do we not all know that? And I'm here to say I don't know. But I think that it's important to note that, sexually transmitted diseases and the rates of those are on the rise again. So is it possible that people are just tired of some of the research? Did we become a little bit... I don't think that it caused the problem, but I think sometimes... all the discussion around how we handle COVID, did we do it right, did we not do it right, the conflicting information, misinformation that's being spread widely and virally, is that part of the reason? Are we thinking that researchers are erring on the side of caution and that we really don't have to worry as much? I'm still hearing from practitioners, a psychologist not very long ago in southwestern Ontario saying it can't be alcohol for all of this. If that was the case, everybody born in the 70s would have fetal alcohol spectrum disorder. So it's that kind of attitude that I'm really not clear on why, but it's still being spread. And I think I've mentioned before that I've had friends say to me, it can't be all due to alcohol. And if, all of our parents drank and we're fine. And my response is always two things. One of them is define fine. So we have a mental health crisis that is, in fact, linked to our culture's love affair with alcohol. There's no question about that. And then, my second thing that I say is that, my mother did not consume alcohol while she was expecting any of us. She wasn't a drinker back then. But she did smoke cigarettes. And so there's a slight chance that maybe that had something to do with some of my tendencies to be a little bit scattered or, my concentration. I'm easily distracted and doing 5 million things at once sometimes. So there is a link between cigarette smoking and attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. So is that the case? I don't know. But what I do know is that she didn't do it on purpose, right? And we only know what we know. And when we know better, we can do better. But the frustration for me continues. So this is like the bad news is that there is some resistance to hearing some of this information. And when you're talking about yourself, if you want to take risks that are, if you want to drink alcohol, we all know it's not good for us. That's one thing for you to do it. Hopefully you're developing, strategies to maintain healthy-ish relationships with whatever you use to relax or cope with day-to-day stressors. Those are important things for us to maintain our mental health and our own wellness and information. We have a right to make informed decisions. And it is exceptionally important that we have information available to make us make informed decisions about another person. And the other person is the baby that's developing, that you're taking care of from the moment of conception. And so, again, I've been saying for years that any kind of reform or policy change or just adjustments or new strategies or new modalities for treating and supporting and assessing mental health and wellness, it needs to have the understanding that a really good portion of the people that are going to be walking through the doors looking for mental health supports also have had prenatal alcohol, prenatal substance exposure themselves, which means that their presentation is more complicated and it needs to be supported in a different way. And so I'm looking at this quote from Anderson, Mela, and Stewart in their research from 2018, and it says, ignoring or denying the etiology of mental illness stemming from prenatal alcohol exposure is likely detrimental to the success of all strategic approaches to mental health, suicide ideation, and actualization. So it's true, individuals who have been exposed to alcohol are at a much higher risk for many things, including mental health and addiction, extra parenting support, psychological services, more trips to the emergency or the hospital, justice involvement, rehabilitation and residential treatment. There's just, there's huge impacts to our system overall. Educational supports are so much higher for individuals who have this complicated presentation as a result of substance exposure during pregnancy. So it's a pretty important investment. It's pretty important that these conversations come back to our kitchen table, because as I was saying this week, and what it continues to frustrate and puzzle people, is that more people are admitting to alcohol use during their pregnancy now than they were 10 years ago. It used to be 1 in 13 admitted to. Now, recently in the early 2020s, it was 1 in 10. And the most recent piece of research I got, or literature I received, was in Manitoba, 1 in 7 pregnancies are exposed to alcohol. So that's concerning, to say the least. And I do think, I work with people who have FASD. I work with adults who have FASD. And I tell you, they have some pretty strong opinions around how we use the term fetal alcohol spectrum disorder, the stigma that continues to surround them because of the title. And also, they're pretty frustrated with our need as a system to be so careful around the language we use and to make sure that we don't hurt anybody's feelings. But their opinion is people need to know this information. If it hurts their feelings, but it saves them the lifelong angst of knowing that they could have prevented poor outcomes for their kids, then we are serving them with a gift. So I'll leave it at that, with the hope that you will be inspired to offer the people in your circle this gift. So hopefully this conversation will make it back to your kitchen tables, and I encourage you to check out my website for more information, or if you're interested in any kind of training or education, or if you just want to connect with me and ask me some more questions or give me some suggestions or what you think might be helpful in terms of this podcast, or certainly, supporting individuals and families who experience the impact of prenatal exposures on the daily. So yes, check out my website, and the books that I talked about are both available on Amazon. But if you are interested in orders for a few people at a time, make sure you connect with us. With many thanks, Angela.